The first time I realized someone was selling hunting passes to my land, it wasn't through a letter, a warning sign, or even a phone call. It was the sound of a rifle cracking through the trees behind my barn at 6:30 in the morning, followed by a man yelling that I was trespassing on my own property. I stood there in mud boots and a coffee-stained jacket, staring at a stranger with a scoped rifle, and thought, this is either a prank or the dumbest crime I've ever been dragged into. I own 42 acres of mixed woodland and pasture just outside a small rural community that likes to pretend it's upscale because someone once built a stone entrance sign. My land predates the HOA by decade. My deed is older than most of the board members. I don't belong to them, never have and never will. That fact had irritated Karen, the HOA president, from the moment she realized she couldn't find me, regulate me, or vote me out of existence. Karen liked rules the way some people like oxygen. She needed them everywhere, even where they didn't apply. Especially where they didn't apply. I had just finished feeding my horses when I heard the second shot, closer this time. Dirt puffed up near the tree line. Not dangerously close, but close enough that my stomach tightened and my brain flipped into a very specific kind of calm that only shows up when something is deeply wrong. I followed the sound through the trees, and that's when I saw them. 3 men in camo, 1 woman holding binoculars, all standing on a ridge that very clearly sat well inside my boundary markers. They had orange wristbands on. Bright, clean, branded. One of the men spotted me and immediately raised his voice. "You need to back off," he said. "This is a paid hunt." I actually laughed, because sometimes your brain protects itself by assuming the world hasn't completely lost its mind yet. "A paid hunt," I repeated. "On my land." He nodded, confident, like this was the most normal sentence in the world. "We got passes from the HOA. Signed and everything." That was the moment the laughter stopped. I told them to lower their weapons and step away from the ridge. One of them hesitated. Another tightened his grip on the rifle like he was waiting to see who blinked first. The woman with the binoculars looked confused, like she was just now realizing that something didn't add up. I pulled my phone out and took a photo of the wristbands. Then I took a photo of the rifles. Then I took a photo of the guy who told me I was trespassing. "You've been scammed," I said. "And you're about 30 seconds away from meeting people who don't enjoy being lied to." They laughed again, but it was thinner this time. Karen's name came out of their mouths like a guarantee. HOA President. Community Authority. Official Permission. They even said the words legal access like they'd practiced them. I told them to unload their firearms and walk back the way they came. They didn't. Instead, one of them said, "She said you'd try this." That sentence sat heavy in the air. "She said you'd lie," he added. "Said you'd get aggressive." That's when I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was planned. I called the sheriff first, because that's what you do when armed strangers are on your property. Then I called the state wildlife hotline, because I could already see where this was going. As I spoke, I watched one of the hunters scan the trees like he was still expecting deer to walk out, completely unbothered by the fact that he was standing in the middle of a legal nightmare. The sheriff said they'd send someone when they could. The wildlife dispatcher asked a very specific question. "Are they charging for access to the hunt?" I said yes. She paused. "Are they licensed outfitters?" I said no. She paused longer. "Are they representing themselves as authorized land managers?" I didn't even hesitate. "Yes." Her voice changed. Sharper. Focused. "Stay where you are. Do not confront them further. Officers are en route." That was when the woman with the binoculars started arguing. She said they'd driven 3 hours. She said they'd paid good money. She said Karen had laminated maps. She even pulled one out to show me. It had my pond labeled as Community Wildlife Zone. My barn was marked Storage Facility. My home wasn't labeled at all. I took a photo of that too. Karen arrived 10 minutes later in an SUV that had never seen dirt in its life. She stepped out wearing sunglasses and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She waved like she was greeting friends at a barbecue. "There seems to be some confusion," she said loudly. She didn't look at me when she said it. She looked at them. I told her to leave. She ignored that too. She explained that the HOA had expanded its recreational offerings, that unused land was being leveraged for community benefit, that she had authority, that she had paperwork. She finally turned to me and said, "You don't use most of it anyway." That was the sentence that changed everything. I told her she was selling access to land she didn't own. I told her she was endangering lives. I told her she was committing a crime. She smiled and said, "We'll let the authorities sort that out." Sirens cut through the trees before she could say anything else. 2 green trucks rolled in, marked clearly with the state emblem. Game Wardens stepped out, calm, professional, and very interested in the rifles, the wristbands, and the laminated map. Karen's smile faded when one of them asked who issued the passes. Her voice wavered for the first time when she said, "I did." The warden asked her under what authority. She started listing HOA bylaws. He stopped her mid-sentence. "Ma'am," he said, "this isn't a noise complaint." She tried to argue. She always did. He asked for her license to operate a commercial hunt. She didn't have one. He asked for proof of land ownership. She gestured vaguely. He asked for the deed. She looked at me. That's when I knew this was going to end very badly for her. And this was only the beginning. The warden separated everyone like they'd done this 1,000 times, because they had. Rifles were cleared and tagged. Wristbands were cut off and dropped into evidence bags. One of the hunters kept apologizing to me under his breath, the kind of apology people give when they realize they've been played and there's no way to unplay it. Karen kept trying to insert herself into every conversation. She hovered. She interrupted. She corrected details that no one had asked her about. Each time, a warden gently moved her back a step, and each time her jaw tightened a little more. They walked the boundary lines with GPS units and my survey markers. They photographed the posted signs I'd put up years ago. They took copies of my deed straight from my phone, emailed and verified on the spot. One of them nodded quietly when he saw the dates. "This isn't even close," he said. Karen heard that and snapped. "You can't just trust something he pulls up on a phone," she said. "We have documents too." The warden asked to see them. She handed over a thin folder like it was a winning hand. Bylaws. Meeting notes. A printed satellite image with lines drawn in pen. No deeds. No easements. No permissions. The warden didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He explained, slowly and clearly, that selling access to hunt was regulated at the state level. That charging money turned it into a commercial activity. That commercial hunting without a license was a serious offense. That representing land you did not own as available for hunting added another layer of trouble. Karen tried to laugh it off. "We weren't hunting," she said. "It's more like wildlife appreciation with equipment." One of the hunters snorted before he could stop himself. That didn't help her case. They asked how much she'd charged. She hesitated. That hesitation did more damage than any confession could have. Phones came out. Payment apps were opened. Receipts surfaced. Screenshots of messages with dates and amounts and her name attached to every single one. 200 per person. Weekend passes. Limited slots. She'd even used scarcity to drive demand. The wardens exchanged a look. They asked where the money went. Karen said it went to the HOA. They asked who approved it. Karen said she did. They asked where it was recorded. Karen said it was under recreational revenue. They asked to see the ledger. She said the treasurer had it. The treasurer did not know she was about to have a very bad afternoon. While one warden handled the paperwork, another pulled me aside. He asked if this had happened before. I told him about the signs being moved, the trail cameras going missing, the random tire tracks that never made sense. I told him about the time Karen tried to tell me my fence interfered with community access to nature. He wrote all of it down. Karen noticed. She stepped closer and told me I was exaggerating. She said I was emotional. She said I was hostile to community growth. She said I was trying to punish her for doing her job. I told her she didn't have a job on my land. That shut her up for about 5 seconds. The hunters were released with warnings after statements were taken. They looked embarrassed, angry, and more than a little betrayed. One of them asked Karen for his money back. She told him to contact the HOA office. A warden corrected her. "No," he said. "He'll be contacting you." The trucks pulled out an hour later, taking evidence with them and leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the gunshots had that morning. Karen didn't leave. She followed me back toward my barn, heels sinking into dirt, still talking like she thought momentum would save her. "This didn't have to be like this," she said. "You could have worked with us." I stopped and turned around. "You sold people permission to shoot on my land," I said. "There is no version of that where we work together." She accused me of sabotaging a community initiative. She accused me of hating the HOA. She accused me of being difficult on purpose. I told her to leave. She finally did, but not before promising this wasn't over. She was right about that, just not in the way she thought. By that evening, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. HOA members I barely knew were calling. Some were apologetic. Some were furious. A few asked if the hunting weekends would still happen. I told them the truth. There was no hunting program. There never was. There was only Karen, collecting money and gambling with people's safety on land she didn't own. That didn't sit well with everyone. The HOA board called an emergency meeting the next morning. Karen didn't invite me, but someone forwarded the agenda anyway. Legal review. Financial clarification. Public relations strategy. Public relations made me laugh. Halfway through the meeting, someone leaked the wildlife citation notice to the neighborhood group chat. It spread fast. Screenshot. Speculation. People asking questions Karen couldn't answer without admitting she'd gone rogue. By noon, the treasurer had frozen the HOA account. By 1, a lawyer had been retained. By 2, Karen sent me an email. It wasn't an apology. It was a demand. She claimed I had interfered with a sanctioned community event. She claimed lost revenue. She claimed defamation. She demanded I retract statements and cooperate with an internal investigation. I forwarded the email to the game warden. He replied with a single sentence. "Please do not respond." That evening, a green truck pulled back into my driveway. Same warden as before. He asked if I'd be willing to give a formal statement at the regional office. I said yes. Before he left, he told me something quietly, like it was a courtesy. "She didn't just break one rule," he said. "She broke several." I watched his truck disappear down the road, and felt something shift. The irritation I'd carried for years started turning into something sharper. Not anger. Not fear. Certainty. Karen thought authority came from a title. She was about to learn where it actually came from. The regional office smelled like old coffee and paper, the kind of place where bad decisions went to become permanent record. I sat across from 2 wardens and a woman from compliance who didn't smile once. They recorded everything. Date, times, conversations. I handed over trail cam photos I'd never thought I'd need, images of strangers wandering through my trees with rifles slung casually like they belonged there. When I mentioned the laminated maps, the woman's pen paused. "She made maps," she said. "Yes," I replied. "With labels." That earned a look between them. They explained what Karen had actually done in plain terms. Commercial hunting operation without a license. Fraud. Misrepresentation of land ownership. Endangerment. Possible wildlife violations depending on what had been taken before I caught it. Each charge stacked neatly, like a tower she'd built herself and then dared gravity to ignore. I asked if this happened often. One of the wardens shook his head. "Usually people know better," he said. "Or they stop after a warning." Karen had skipped the warning part entirely. When I left the office, my phone showed 12 missed calls from unknown numbers. The HOA group chat had turned into a digital brawl. Screenshots of Karen's emails were being passed around. Someone posted the map. Someone else circled my barn in red and added question marks like they couldn't believe it was real. Karen tried to control the narrative. She sent out a statement claiming the program was misunderstood, that no shots were fired, that it was suspended voluntarily, that the HOA was cooperating fully. That lasted until one of the hunters posted photos of himself standing on my ridge, rifle visible, time-stamped. The comments section ate her alive. The next escalation came fast. 2 days later, I came home to find fresh signs posted along my fence line. HOA recreational area. Access by permit only. They were zip-tied to my fence like a challenge. I didn't touch them. I took photos. I took video. I called the warden. He sighed in a way that told me this was about to get interesting. Karen wasn't just panicking. She was doubling down. She sent a certified letter claiming an easement for community access that didn't exist. She cited bylaws again. She accused me of destroying community assets when I removed the signs she'd put on my fence without permission. I hadn't removed them yet. The wardens did. They came out that afternoon with bolt cutters and a camera. They documented every sign, every zip tie, every placement. They removed them themselves and bagged them as evidence. Karen arrived halfway through, red-faced and loud. "You can't just take those," she shouted. "Those are HOA property." One of the wardens looked at her and said, "So is the money you collected." That stopped her cold. She tried to order them off my land. They ignored her. She tried to tell me I was escalating things. I told her she'd started this with a cash app and a lie. That night, someone drove through my gate and left it open. Horses wandered. I found them an hour later near the road, spooked and muddy. I didn't need proof to know where the hostility was coming from, but I installed new cameras anyway. The next morning, Karen filed a police report claiming I'd threatened her. The officer who showed up recognized my address. He asked to see the footage. I showed him everything. He left without taking note. By the end of the week, the Game Wardens returned with a warrant. They served it at the HOA office. Computers, files, payment records. Karen wasn't there when it happened. She was at home, posting about harassment and persecution. Her supporters were getting quieter. The treasurer resigned. The vice president stopped answering calls. The board scheduled another emergency meeting, this time with lawyers present and Karen noticeably absent from the agenda. I got a call that evening from a number I didn't recognize. It was the warden. "They found more payments," he said. "More weekends. More people." "How many?" I asked. There was a pause. "Enough," he said. The story was no longer about my land. It was about how far she'd gone without anyone stopping her. About how many people she'd convinced that authority could be invented if you said it confidently enough. Karen still hadn't apologized. She sent one more email that night. She accused me of ruining her reputation. I didn't respond. Because the state was about to do something far more permanent than argue. The neighborhood had split cleanly into two camps, and neither of them was quiet. There were the people who suddenly realized they'd been living under someone who treated authority like a personal costume, and then there were the ones who refused to believe Karen could ever be wrong because admitting that meant admitting they'd trusted her judgment with their money and their safety. I stayed out of it as much as I could, but it was hard to ignore when my driveway started becoming a meeting point for whispered conversations and nervous apologies. The first real crack in Karen's armor came from somewhere she never expected. The HOA's insurance provider requested documentation. They wanted to know why there were firearms involved in a so-called recreational program. They wanted to know who approved it. They wanted to know why none of it had been disclosed. When the board couldn't answer those questions, the provider suspended coverage pending investigation. That single email caused more panic than the wardens ever had. Without insurance, every meeting suddenly mattered. Karen showed up to the next board meeting anyway. She wasn't invited, but she walked in like she owned the room. People stopped talking when she did. She launched into a speech about overreach, about hostile landowners, about outsiders interfering with community autonomy. She said my name more than once. Each time, someone corrected her and told her to stick to fact. She didn't like that. When the board asked her to explain the payments, she claimed they were donations. When they asked why the money went directly to her account before being transferred, she said it was for efficiency. When they asked why she'd ignored legal advice from months earlier about land use boundaries, she said lawyers were too cautious. That was when the treasurer's replacement stood up and said the quiet part out loud. "You acted alone," she said. "You didn't have authority." Karen snapped back that authority was implied by her role. That leadership meant making decisions without waiting for permission. That hesitation was weakness. The room didn't respond the way she expected. Someone asked about the horses. Someone asked about the open gate. Someone asked about the threat. Someone asked why the HOA was now facing state scrutiny because of her personal initiative. Karen realized, too late, that momentum had shifted. That same afternoon, the wardens called me again. They wanted to walk the property one more time, this time with a surveyor. They wanted clean documentation. They wanted to eliminate every argument Karen might try to make later. We walked the fence lines while the surveyor placed flags and recorded coordinate. Everything matched my deed perfectly. No easements, no shared access, no gray areas. The warden smiled when the last marker went in. "She doesn't have a leg to stand on," he said. Karen found out about the survey within hours. She sent another message accusing me of intimidation. She threatened civil action. She claimed emotional distress. She said I was weaponizing the state against her. I forwarded that message too. The wardens were building a case now, not just reacting to complaints. They interviewed former board members. They interviewed residents who'd been approached to help market the hunting weekends. They interviewed people who'd raised concerns and been brushed off. Patterns emerged. Karen had overridden vote. She'd canceled meetings. She'd signed contracts without approval. The hunting passes weren't an isolated incident. They were just the most visible one. The moment that finally broke her public image came when one of the hunters posted again. This time, it was a screenshot of Karen's message telling him not to worry about legality because she had it handled. She'd even joked about landowners always being dramatic. That post spread faster than anything else had. By nightfall, Karen's name was no longer attached to authority. It was attached to recklessness. I was closing the barn when a car pulled up slowly at the gate. Karen stepped out alone this time. No sunglasses. No smile. She looked smaller somehow, like confidence had been holding her upright and it had finally given out. She said she wanted to talk. I told her to stay by the gate. She accused me of enjoying this. She said I was humiliating her. She said all of this could have been avoided if I'd just agreed to cooperate. I told her she'd crossed a line the moment she put guns on my land. She said she was under pressure. That the HOA needed money. That people expected result. I said that wasn't my problem. She asked if I'd considered dropping my complaints. I laughed then, not because it was funny, but because it was unbelievable she was still asking. "I don't control this anymore," I said. "You gave that up." She stood there for a long moment, then got back in her car without another word. 2 days later, the state filed formal charges. Karen wasn't president anymore by the end of the week. And the story still wasn't finished. The moment Karen lost the title, she lost the shield she'd been hiding behind, and the fallout was immediate. Notices went out to every homeowner explaining that the HOA was under investigation and that certain actions taken by the former president were unauthorized. The language was careful, legal, and clearly written by someone who wanted distance from her as fast as possible. People who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly waved again. A few stopped by with awkward apologies, and baked goods like sugar could undo months of silence. Karen did not disappear quietly. She started telling anyone who would listen that she'd been forced out, that the board had betrayed her, that I had manipulated the situation from the start. She framed herself as a whistleblower, a victim of rural hostility and anti-community aggression. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't been exhausting. The real pressure hit when the refunds started. Hunters wanted their money back. All of it. Immediately. The HOA accounts were frozen, and Karen's personal account was now part of the investigation, which meant she couldn't touch most of what she'd collected. Angry emails turned into formal demands. Demands turned into threats of civil action. Suddenly, the people she'd reassured so confidently were sending her screenshots of statutes and deadlines. She tried to redirect them to the HOA. The HOA's lawyer shut that down fast. A notice went out stating that any financial transactions related to the unauthorized hunting program were the sole responsibility of the individual who initiated them. Karen's name was not mentioned, but no one needed help connecting the dots. That same week, I was served papers. She was suing me. The claim was a mess. Defamation. Interference with economic opportunity. Emotional distress. Abuse of process. It read like someone had thrown legal terms at a wall to see what might stick. The filing included screenshots of my social media posts, which consisted mostly of photos of my land and one sentence saying I did not authorize hunting. My lawyer didn't even finish reading before he leaned back and smiled. "This isn't a lawsuit," he said. "This is panic." The state didn't slow down just because she'd filed something civil. If anything, it accelerated. Investigators pulled bank records. They pulled email logs. They pulled messages she thought were deleted. The laminated maps showed up again, this time on a conference table under fluorescent lights, being used to explain intent. Intent was the word they cared about most. Karen hadn't made a mistake. She'd made a plan. She'd researched pricing. She'd scheduled dates. She'd advertised quietly to avoid attention. She'd told people she had authority she did not have. And she'd continued after the first warning signs appeared. The day I gave my deposition, she was already there. Sitting at the far end of the room. No makeup. No confidence. Just a tight jaw and hands that wouldn't stop moving. When our eyes met, she looked away first. Her attorney tried to paint me as hostile. Tried to suggest I'd exaggerated danger. Tried to imply that no one had been hurt, so no real harm had occurred. The warden's report shut that down. Loaded firearms. Unlicensed commercial hunt. Misrepresentation. Trespass facilitated by a third party. Endangerment of livestock. Endangerment of residents. It was all there in black and white. Karen was asked, under oath, why she believed she had the right to sell access to land she didn't own. She said she believed the HOA represented collective interest. She was asked if she had verified ownership. She said she assumed. That word landed hard. Assumed. The deposition ended early. Outside, she tried to talk to me. She said this had gone too far. She said she'd learned her lesson. She said people were being unfair. I told her fairness stopped mattering when guns entered the equation. That evening, the state issued a press release. They didn't name me. They didn't name her. They didn't need to. Everyone in the county knew exactly who it was about. Unauthorized commercial hunting operation shut down. Charges pending. Ongoing investigation. Karen's phone stopped ringing. Mine didn't. Neighbors asked if I felt vindicated. Friends asked if I was relieved. Reporters asked if I planned to comment. I felt something quieter than all of that. I felt done. Because no matter what happened next, Karen no longer controlled the story. And she was about to learn what happens when consequences stop being hypothetical. The silence after the press release was heavier than all the noise that came before it. Karen vanished from meetings, from social media, from the places she used to hold court like a queen surveying her domain. The HOA stopped saying her name altogether. Every email referred to her as the former president or the individual involved, like language itself was trying to disinfect the situation. That didn't mean she'd accepted it. 2 weeks later, I found tire tracks cutting across the edge of my lower pasture, deep enough to tell me someone had driven slowly, deliberately, like they were looking for something. A new lock on my gate had been tested. Not broken. Tested. The kind of behavior that wasn't about access, but about intimidation. I sent the photos to the warden. He replied within minutes. They were already watching her. Karen's civil case stalled almost immediately. Her attorney requested extensions, missed deadlines, filed amended complaints that removed entire sections after opposing counsel threatened sanctions. It became clear she was running out of both money and credibility. The hunters who hadn't been refunded yet filed their own claims. Small claims court, civil court, wherever they could get in line. One of them showed up at her house. Not to threaten her. To demand his money back. The police report that followed didn't help her image. The state investigation moved quietly now, the way serious things do. Subpoenas went out. Financial institutions responded. A forensic accountant got involved. The wardens stopped calling as often, which I'd learned meant they didn't need anything else from me. They had what they needed. The HOA held a town hall to reassure residents. A lawyer explained that the association itself was cooperating and had implemented new oversight procedures. A resident asked if the hunting program had been approved by a vote. The lawyer said no. Another asked if the land was ever HOA property. The lawyer said no. Another asked why no one stopped her sooner. The lawyer didn't answer that one. Karen tried to reframe herself again, this time as overwhelmed. She told a local blogger that she'd been under immense pressure. That she'd believed she was acting in the best interest of the community. That she'd trusted verbal assurances. The blogger published the interview alongside screenshots of the laminated map. The comments were brutal. I ran into Karen once more by accident at a grocery store. She looked older. Tired. She pretended not to see me until our carts nearly collided. She said my name like it tasted bad. She asked if I was happy now. I told her happiness had nothing to do with it. She said she was facing criminal charges. I said I knew. She said people were treating her like a criminal. I didn't respond. Because that part wasn't my call. A week later, the wardens executed another warrant. This time at her home. Computers, phones, storage drives. The neighbors watched from behind curtains. No sirens. No drama. Just paperwork and quiet efficiency. That was when the rumor mill finally turned against her completely. People started comparing notes. Other incidents surfaced. Minor abuses that had never gone anywhere because she'd controlled the board. Fines that vanished. Selective enforcement. Favoritism. The hunting passes had cracked the surface. Everything else poured out. The district attorney filed charges shortly after. Multiple counts. Financial crimes. Regulatory violations. Endangerment. The language was dry and devastating. Karen pled not guilty. Her trial date was set. The judge issued a no-contact order. She was no longer allowed to communicate with me directly. That night, I walked my property at dusk. The trees were quiet. The fence lines intact. The land felt like it could breathe again. I realized how much tension I'd been carrying without noticing, waiting for the next confrontation, the next letter, the next threat. For the first time in months, nothing happened. And that was when I knew the end was finally coming. The weeks leading up to the trial felt unreal, like the air before a storm that everyone knows is coming but no one can quite believe will actually hit. Karen stayed out of sight, at least publicly. Her house blinds were always drawn when I drove past the street on the way into town. The HOA mailbox stopped receiving angry letters and started receiving subpoenas instead. The district attorney's office reached out to me once more, this time to prepare me for testimony. They didn't need me to dramatize anything. They needed me to be precise. Date. Boundaries. What I knew and when I knew it. They walked me through how the defense might try to frame the situation. Overreaction. Miscommunication. Personal feud. None of it stuck when held up against the evidence. Karen's legal team tried one last maneuver before trial. They offered a settlement. No admission of guilt. Confidentiality. A payment in exchange for my cooperation and silence. The number wasn't small. It would have covered years of property taxes. I said no. Not out of spite. Not out of pride. Because this was no longer about me getting something back. This was about stopping her from ever doing this to someone else. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. No grand drama. No shouting. Just wood benches, fluorescent lights, and a judge who had clearly seen worse people than Karen sit in that chair. She entered wearing a conservative suit, hair pulled tight, posture stiff. She didn't look at me. The prosecution laid it out methodically. The payments, the advertisements, the map, the text, the timestamps, the absence of authority. They didn't accuse. They demonstrated. Each piece fit into the next until the picture was impossible to ignore. When it was my turn, I told the story the same way I always had. I described waking up to gunfire. I described being told I was trespassing on my own land. I described finding my horses near the road after someone left my gate open. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Karen's attorney tried to suggest that I'd been hostile from the start. That I'd escalated the situation by calling authorities instead of working it out privately. I answered simply. There were guns, I said. That makes it public. The judge nodded. One of the hunters testified next. He explained how the passes were marketed, how official everything sounded, how confident Karen had been, how shocked he'd felt standing there with wardens asking questions he hadn't realized he should have asked himself. Another hunter confirmed it. The laminated map was entered into evidence. Karen watched it projected onto the wall like it was a betrayal in physical form. When she took the stand, she tried to explain herself. She spoke about leadership, about initiative, about believing the HOA had implied rights. She said she never intended harm. She said she didn't think anyone would actually get hurt. The prosecutor asked a single question that changed the room. Did you verify ownership before selling access? Karen hesitated. No, she said. That was it. The verdict didn't come immediately. The judge recessed. Everyone waited. Karen sat alone. No supporters. No whispered encouragement. Just her and the consequences she'd delayed for too long. When the judge returned, his voice was steady. Guilty on multiple counts. The language was careful. The reasoning was thorough. The disappointment was clear. Sentencing was scheduled for a later date. Karen didn't cry. She just stared straight ahead like she was still waiting for someone to step in and fix it for her. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked for comment. I declined. This wasn't entertainment. It was closure. As I walked back to my truck, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not triumphant. Not vindictive. Just relieved. The land had been defended. Authority had been tested. And for the first time since that morning gunshot echoed through my trees, I slept without listening for the next one. One chapter remained. And it would finish what she started. Sentencing day arrived quietly, without the tension I expected. No crowds. No protests. No dramatic last stands. Karen walked into the courtroom alone, carrying a folder she no longer needed, her shoulders tight like she was bracing for an argument that never came. The confidence that used to announce her presence was gone. In its place was someone smaller, someone realizing too late that authority doesn't exist just because you believe in it hard enough. The judge didn't rush. He recapped the case slowly, methodically, like he wanted every word to land. Unauthorized commercial activity, fraud, endangerment, abuse of position. He spoke about responsibility, about how leadership without restraint becomes danger, and about how ignorance isn't a defense when you profit from it. Karen stared at the table while he spoke. When he asked if she had anything to say, she stood. Her voice shook at first, then steadied as she slipped back into old habits. She talked about intentions, about pressure, about how she never meant for things to spiral. She said she believed she was helping the community. She said she didn't think it would go this far. The judge listened without interruption. Then he responded. He said belief does not replace verification. He said leadership requires limit. He said people with power don't get to experiment with other people's safety. He said selling access to land you don't own, for activities that involve lethal weapons, isn't a misunderstanding. It's a decision. He sentenced her to probation with strict conditions, heavy fines, full restitution to every person she took money from, a permanent ban from holding any HOA or nonprofit leadership role, and mandatory ethics and regulatory compliance courses. On top of that, the state revoked her eligibility to participate in or organize any hunting-related activity in any capacity. He also issued a civil judgment allowing me to recover costs related to security, fencing, livestock risk, and legal fees. Karen finally looked at me then. There was no anger in her eyes. Just disbelief. Outside the courthouse, the world moved on like nothing had happened. Cars passed. People went to work. Life didn't pause for fallen authority figures. It never does. The HOA dissolved 3 months later. Not dramatically. Not scandalously. Quietly. The insurance never came back. Too many residents left. Too many lawsuits drained the reserve. A court-appointed administrator handled the wind down. Assets were sold. Accounts closed. The stone entrance sign was removed one morning without ceremony. No one replaced Karen. There was nothing left to replace. The land stayed the same. Trees grew. Fences held. Wildlife returned to patterns that made sense again. I replaced the trail cameras she'd had stolen years ago and caught nothing more dangerous than deer and the occasional curious fox. The gate stayed locked. The quiet felt earned. One afternoon, months later, I got a check in the mail. Restitution. It wasn't just from her. It was from the state pool created by the fines. Enough to cover everything I'd lost and then some. I deposited it and didn't feel triumphant. I felt finished. The last time I saw Karen was at a distance. She was walking out of a compliance class held at a community center across town. No followers. No clipboard. No agenda. Just someone carrying consequences in a tote bag. She didn't see me. I didn't stop. What stayed with me wasn't the courtroom or the verdict or even the moment the wardens first arrived. It was that first morning. Standing in my own woods, being told I didn't belong there. Being told someone else had sold permission to erase me. That never happened again. Because some lines, once crossed, don't bounce back. They snap. And when they do, they remind everyone watching that authority is borrowed, not owned. And land, real land, remembers who protects it,